3 months ago, my fiancée told me I was too boring for her exciting lifestyle. She said it casually, like it was just a fact, not an insult. I let her believe she'd outgrown me, that I'd fade quietly into the background of her new, thrilling world. But last weekend, she walked into a room and saw exactly who I'm with now. And for the first time in years, she had nothing to say. Before all this, our relationship looked perfectly fine from the outside. We had our routines, Sunday brunch, Netflix marathons, late-night walks when the city was quiet. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. I thought that's what stability looked like. No constant drama, no guessing games, just comfort. Apparently, comfort bored her. It started subtly. She began dropping little comments about living life to the fullest, asking why I never wanted to try something new. At first, I laughed it off. We had traveled, tried new restaurants, gone to concerts. I just didn't feel the need to post every move online or chase adrenaline like a currency. But she compared me to her friends' partners, the ones who organized surprise trips or threw elaborate parties. She'd sigh and say, "They just have more energy than you." I didn't realize then that she'd already started rewriting the story of who I was in her head. In her version, I was safe, predictable, a placeholder until someone more fun came along. It all came to a head one Thursday night. She was getting ready for some industry party. High heels, shimmering dress, the works, and I was finishing up work emails on the couch. She looked at me and said, half smiling, "You know, sometimes I wonder if we're just too different. You're stable, reliable, but maybe too boring for me." I froze. Not because the words hurt, though they did, but because of how casually she said them. Like she was commenting on the weather. Like my entire personality could be summed up and dismissed in one word. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just said, "Maybe you're right." And in that moment, I made a silent decision. If she wanted to believe she'd outgrown me, I'd let her. But I wouldn't disappear quietly. What I didn't know then was that the perfect opportunity for her to see exactly who I really was, and how wrong she'd been, was already on its way. 2 weeks after that Thursday night, I got invited to an after-work gathering. Not my usual scene. A trendy rooftop bar with overpriced cocktails and a crowd that looked like they stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. I almost said no, but one of my coworkers insisted. "Come on, man. You've been a ghost lately. Besides, there's someone you should meet." The night was warm, the skyline sharp against a fading sunset. I felt out of place at first. Everyone seemed to know each other, laughing in small circles. Then, in the middle of ordering a drink, I heard a voice behind me. "Is this seat taken?" I turned, and there she was, not beautiful in the filtered, curated way my fiancé obsessed over, but magnetic. Her confidence wasn't loud. It was steady, like she didn't need the room's approval to exist. We talked. At first, just polite small talk. Work, travel, the usual. But within minutes, I realized I was leaning in, actually listening. Not watching the clock, not faking interest. She had this way of making even silence feel comfortable. By the end of the night, my phone buzzed with a text from her. "Glad you came out tonight. Let's grab coffee sometime. I think you've got more going on than you let on." That sentence stuck with me. More going on than I let on. It was the polar opposite of too boring. Over the next few weeks, coffee turned into dinners, and dinners into weekends. It wasn't romantic at first. I wasn't ready for that. But the connection was real. And slowly, without trying, I was stepping into a different version of myself. Not chasing excitement for show, but saying yes to things because I wanted to. One night, she invited me to an art event downtown. I almost didn't go. It was the kind of place my fiancé used to drag me to while complaining that I looked unimpressed. But this time, I found myself actually talking to the artists, asking questions. By the end of the evening, people I'd just met were inviting me to another event. Apparently, I wasn't boring when I wasn't being measured against someone else's fantasy of me. And that's when it happened. Halfway through the night, I felt the shift in the air, that strange, prickling awareness that you're being watched. I turned, scanning the crowd. And there she was, my fiancée, or, I guess, ex by now, standing near the entrance, her eyes locked on me. Her expression wasn't anger or jealousy. It was confusion, like she was looking at a version of me she didn't recognize. I took a slow sip of my drink, pretending I hadn't seen her. But inside, my pulse quickened, because I knew this was only the beginning of whatever was about to happen next. But that was just the start. She hadn't yet seen who I was with that night. She didn't approach me that night, not directly. Instead, I caught glimpses of her moving around the room, pretending to mingle, but her eyes kept finding me. Every time I turned my head, there she was, half hidden behind someone else, studying me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. The woman I was with, let's call her Claire, didn't seem to notice at first. She was mid-story about a friend's chaotic road trip when she glanced past my shoulder and paused just a fraction too long. I followed her gaze, but by then my ex had shifted behind a group near the bar. "Friend of yours?" Claire asked, raising an eyebrow. I shrugged. Something like that. Her expression said she wasn't convinced, but she didn't press. Instead, she leaned in and kept talking, her voice calm, grounded. I could feel my ex watching as Claire laughed at something I said. Not the polite, staged laugh I'd grown used to, but one that came from somewhere real. It hit me in that moment. My ex wasn't seeing a new me so much as the real me she'd ignored for years. And judging by the tightness around her mouth, she didn't like it. The night went on. Claire and I drifted from conversation to conversation, meeting people, sharing drinks, and somewhere in the background, my ex kept orbiting. Not close enough to speak, just close enough to hear. Then came the first tell. I stepped away to grab us another round, and on my way back, I spotted her leaning against a wall, phone in hand. But she wasn't scrolling. She was typing. Fast. I didn't know who she was messaging, but I had a guess. A mutual friend in our old social circle. Maybe two. The kind who lived for fresh gossip. When I got back to Claire, she gave me a small, knowing smile. "She's been watching you the entire time," she said softly. "Feels like surveillance." I laughed under my breath. That's her way. But the truth was, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. Satisfaction because for once, she wasn't in control of the story. Unease because I could feel the temperature rising, and not in a good way. The moment that sealed it came just before we left. Claire stepped away to talk to an artist she knew, and I felt a shadow fall over me. My ex was standing there, drink in hand, pretending to look casual. "Didn't know you were into this crowd," she said, eyes flicking toward Claire. I held her gaze for a moment. "Guess you didn't know a lot of things about me." Her jaw tightened. She opened her mouth to reply, but Claire walked back over, resting a hand lightly on my arm. The shift in my ex's posture was instant. Not anger, not jealousy, something colder. Calculation. That should have been my first red flag. She wasn't Jay. 2 days later, I got the first sign she'd shifted from curiosity to action. It came in the form of a text from a mutual friend. "Hey, random question. You and Claire a thing now?" I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "Why?" The dots blinked for a while then. "Let's just say your ex is making it sound complicated." That word, complicated, was her specialty. She'd never come out with an accusation directly. She'd plant a seed, water it with just enough implication, and let other people's imaginations do the rest. I decided not to bite. Instead, I kept my plans with Claire that weekend. A small gallery opening she'd been invited to, followed by dinner. I didn't tell her about the text. No point turning the evening into a preemptive defense session. The gallery was tucked away on a side street, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Inside, it was the kind of crowd where people actually talked about the art instead of using it as a selfie backdrop. Claire introduced me to a couple of her friends, and for once, I didn't feel like the tag-along boyfriend. I was part of the conversation. Halfway through the night, I stepped out to get some air. That's when I saw her. My ex, standing across the street, talking to someone I recognized. A friend of hers who loved to stir trouble. They weren't looking at the art. They were looking at me. I pretended not to notice and went back inside. But 10 minutes later, Claire excused herself to the restroom, and as soon as she was gone, my ex appeared at my side. No greeting. No small talk. "Funny seeing you here," she said, eyes scanning the room like she owned it. "You seem different." I kept my tone neutral. People change. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Or maybe they just pretend to. Before I could respond, Claire returned, and my ex vanished back into the crowd like smoke. The rest of the night was fine on the surface, but I could feel it. Something had shifted. Claire picked up on it too. In the car, she finally asked, "Do I need to know something?" I told her the truth, most of it. That my ex wasn't exactly thrilled to see me moving on. Claire listened, nodded, and said, "I can handle awkward. But I don't play games." I promised her neither did I. At the time, I meant it. But the next morning, I woke up to 3 new messages from friends, all variations of, "So, heard you're trying to make your ex jealous. Smooth move." And that's when it hit me. She was rewriting the story in real time. And if I didn't get ahead of it, everyone would be reading her version. Cliffhanger. I wasn't ready for what I was about to discover. She'd already planted her narrative in places I couldn't reach. By Monday morning, the shift was undeniable. People I hadn't spoken to in months were suddenly checking in, their messages wrapped in faux concern. It wasn't just curiosity, it was pity disguised as politeness. At first, I assumed she'd just vented to a couple of friends. But then I saw the post. It wasn't on her main account, too obvious. It was buried in a private Facebook group we both used to be part of, one that thrived on cryptic storytime posts. No names, of course, just enough detail for the right people to recognize me. Ever notice how some people suddenly find themselves right after you leave? Almost like they're playing a part to make you jealous? Kinda sad when they drag others into their little performance. The comments section was a feeding frenzy. People speculating, offering armchair psychology, even throwing in stories of their own boring exes who pulled the same move. No one used my name. They didn't have to. In our shared circle, everyone would know exactly who she meant. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling that familiar heat rise in my chest. This wasn't just her being petty. This was her setting the stage so that no matter what anyone saw between me and Claire, they'd already decided the story. I was faking it. Claire noticed something was off that night. We were cooking dinner at her place when she said, "You've been quiet all evening. Work stuff?" I hesitated, then showed her the post. She read it once, then again, her jaw tightening. "Wow," she said finally. "She's really invested in what you're doing." "That's one word for it," I muttered. Claire set her phone down. "So what's your move?" I didn't answer right away, because up until that moment, I hadn't been sure I needed a move. I thought I could ignore her, let her spin whatever narrative she wanted. But now it wasn't just about me. It was about how this was going to land on Claire, a woman who had nothing to do with my past mess. Later that week, I got confirmation of just how far my ex was willing to go. A friend from the old group sent me a screenshot. It was my ex in a private chat, claiming, with absolute confidence, that Claire and I had started seeing each other while we were still together. A lie so precise it would be hard to disprove without dragging out personal timelines I didn't want to make public. That's when I realized this wasn't just gossip. It was a preemptive strike. She was trying to make anything I did look like an act of desperation or spite. And if I let it keep going, the version of me she was selling would become the only one anyone believed. This went so much deeper than I thought, and I knew I had to start playing offense. The first thing I did was nothing. Not because I didn't want to act, but because I knew my ex well enough to understand that any quick, emotional reaction would feed her narrative. If I came out swinging, she'd frame it as proof I was obsessed and couldn't let go. Still, sitting still was its own kind of torture. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced for another half-truth or twisted retelling. Every just checking in from an old acquaintance felt like someone peeking in to see the wreckage. I started running through possible plays in my head. Option 1, go public. Call her out directly. Dismantle the lies with receipts and timestamps. Pros, the truth would be out there. Cons, it would drag Claire right into the mess, and I wasn't about to make her collateral damage. Option 2, ignore it completely. Let her burn herself out. Pros, less drama, less oxygen to her fire. Cons, silence can look like guilt, and she was banking on that. Option 3, the one that kept circling back in my mind, was more subtle. Flip the script. If her goal was to control the story, I could make sure the story she was trying to push collapsed under its own weight. No fighting her directly. No he said, she said. Just undeniable reality, visible to the same people she was trying to sway. That's where the hard part came in, patience. Every instinct screamed at me to act now, to show her that I wasn't some passive background character in her drama. But I forced myself to slow down. Claire could tell I was deep in thought. One night, over takeout, she said, "Whatever you're planning, make sure it's about moving forward, not just proving a point." I nodded, but inside I was thinking, why not both? I started making small moves, accepting invitations to events where I knew mutual friends would be, not with the intention of flaunting anything, but making sure they saw me as I was now, engaged, present, confident. If they happened to see Claire and I together, fine. If they saw me speaking on a panel for work, even better. The less my image lined up with her boring, desperate ex story, the weaker her grip became. But it wasn't enough. I knew her. She wouldn't stop until she felt like she'd won, and her version of winning was me disappearing quietly while she held the last word. So I decided to set a stage of my own. One she couldn't spin. One that would speak louder than anything I could post, say, or explain. I didn't know it yet, but the perfect opportunity to pull it off was already on the horizon. I spent sleepless nights planning. Finally, I knew what I had to do. The opportunity came in the form of an annual fundraiser hosted by one of our mutual friends. It wasn't exactly my scene before, but this year I had a reason to go, and Claire had been invited too. The event was public enough that plenty of our old circle would be there, but structured enough that no one could claim it was some random run-in. I told Claire my plan in broad strokes. We'd go together, enjoy ourselves, and let things play out naturally. No staged moments, no forced interactions, just the two of us being ourselves. She agreed, but with one condition. If she tries to bait you, you don't bite. The night of the fundraiser, I arrived with Claire on my arm. Not as a spectacle, but as a quiet statement. We looked like two people who belonged there together, because we did. Within minutes, I felt the familiar prickling awareness. She was here. I spotted my ex across the room, mid-laugh with a group, but her eyes flicked toward us the second we walked in. Her smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. The evening unfolded exactly as I'd hoped. Claire and I moved from conversation to conversation, catching up with people I hadn't spoken to in months. More than once, I saw subtle double takes, the kind that happen when the reality in front of you doesn't match the story you've been told. At one point, a mutual friend leaned in and said quietly, "You seem different, happier." I just smiled. No lectures, no corrections. Let them connect the dots themselves. By the time dessert was served, I could feel the shift. The whispers that had followed me into the room were fading. Even the friend who'd texted me complicated weeks ago came over, congratulating me on turning things around. And for a moment, I thought, maybe this was it. Maybe I'd already undone most of her work without saying a word. But then, as we were getting ready to leave, I caught her watching me again. This time, there was no calculation in her expression. It was something closer to irritation. Like she'd expected me to crack under the weight of her narrative, and now I was walking out with the one thing she couldn't control, my own version of the truth. Claire and I left that night thinking we'd finally shifted the balance. We didn't see her slip out right after us. We didn't see her on the phone, pacing on the sidewalk, voice low and sharp. The next morning, my phone lit up with notifications. And it took less than 30 seconds of scrolling to realize she hadn't given up, she'd just changed tactics. I thought it was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. By the time I'd finished my first cup of coffee that morning, 3 different people had sent me screenshots. Same source, a series of Instagram stories from my ex. Nothing outright defamatory. She was too calculated for that. Instead, it was a sequence of random posts designed to hint, suggest, and provoke. The first was a blurry photo of the fundraiser venue. The caption read, "Funny how some people suddenly love events they used to hate. Wonder what changed." The second was a repost of a quote graphic. "Some people will use you as a stepping stone, then smile like they built the whole staircase themselves." The third was the kicker, a photo of her with 2 mutual friends, both grinning. The caption, "Grateful for the real ones who've seen the truth from the start." No names, no direct accusations. But to anyone in our shared circle, it was a wink with a bullhorn. Claire saw them too. She didn't say much at first, just a long exhale and a quiet, "She's not going to stop, is she?" I shook my head. Not until she feels like she's won. What made it worse was how fast the posts traveled. Within hours, I could feel the shift again, that subtle cooling from people who'd started to come around. It wasn't open hostility, just hesitation, like they weren't sure which version of me to believe. That afternoon, I got a call from a client, someone I'd met through one of those mutual connections. They'd heard some things and wanted to make sure there wasn't any drama that might spill into our work together. Professional code for, "Your ex is whispering in the right ears." By the time I hung up, my pulse was pounding. This wasn't just social reputation anymore. She was edging into territory that could actually cost me. Claire, ever pragmatic, sat me down that night. "We need to decide if we're playing defense or offense," she said. "Because right now, she's dictating the pace." She was right. My low-key, let people see the truth approach wasn't enough. Not when she was this relentless. The problem was, if I escalated, I risked looking exactly like the unhinged ex she wanted people to believe I was. If I didn't, she'd keep chipping away until the image she'd painted became the only one anyone saw. I went to bed that night with my phone face down on the nightstand, trying to ignore the buzzing of new messages. But just before I drifted off, Claire spoke into the dark. You know, if she's going to make everything look like a show, maybe it's time we give her one she can't control. What happened next made me question everything, including how far I was willing to go. The following week felt like living under a heat lamp. No matter where I went, it seemed like someone was watching, evaluating, deciding which version of the story to believe. It started with little things. A barista I'd known for years suddenly acting distant. A neighbor who used to chat at the mailbox now offering only a curt nod. Individually, nothing major. Together, it was a slow suffocation. Claire caught the brunt of it too. She told me about an acquaintance from the fundraiser who had warned her in a very concerned tone that I was using her to prove a point. Claire, being Claire, asked them straight up if they believed everything they heard secondhand. The conversation ended quickly, but it left its mark. That Friday, I got a message that made my stomach drop. It was from my sister. Hey, just saw something online. Call me. When I did, she didn't waste time. She's saying you cheated. With Claire. She's not naming names, but it's obvious. She even hinted you were still messaging her after you got together with Claire. I sat there in silence, gripping the phone. That was a line my ex had never crossed before, outright inventing behavior she knew could nuke my reputation. She's not just talking to mutual friends anymore, my sister went on. She's in some bigger groups, and people are eating it up. That night, I didn't sleep. Every scenario played out in my head. My work connections seeing it, my family hearing it from someone other than me, Claire's own circle questioning her judgment. By morning, I was in a mental freefall. The careful patience I'd been holding on to for weeks felt pointless. It didn't matter how many genuine interactions I had, how visible I was in my own skin. She could undo it all with a few well-placed whispers and posts. Claire found me staring at my laptop, scrolling through the group threads where the lies were spreading. She set down 2 mugs of coffee and said, "You can't fight shadows." I looked up at her, exhausted. So what do we do? She sat across from me, calm but steady. We stopped letting her control the stage. You've been reacting. Time to make her react. It sounded good in theory, but part of me still hesitated. What if it backfired? What if giving her something to react to only fed the fire? Claire leaned in. Or, she said, we give her something so public, so undeniable, that no amount of spin can make her version stick. We ended on our terms. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of resolve under the weight of all that pressure. But I also knew, whatever move we made next, it had to be final. I realized what I had to do to end this once and for all. The final move came together faster than I expected. Claire had a friend in event planning who was organizing a high-profile charity gala, black tie, media coverage, the kind of thing that would have the city's social scene buzzing for weeks. 2 days before the event, an extra pair of VIP tickets suddenly became available. Perfect stage, Claire said, sliding them across the table. And you know who's going to see it. We didn't need to say her name. My ex would find out. She always did. The night of the gala, we arrived deliberately late enough to make an entrance. Claire looked stunning in a deep emerald gown, her hair swept up in a way that made her presence impossible to ignore. I was in a tailored suit I hadn't worn since before the breakup. We weren't there to gloat, but we weren't blending in either. The room was a flash of cameras, champagne glasses, and low laughter. Within minutes, I caught sight of her, my ex, standing near the far end of the room, eyes fixed on us like she'd been waiting. She wasn't alone. Several people from our old circle were nearby, no doubt ready to collect whatever reaction she could wring out of me. Instead of avoiding her, Claire and I worked the room. We talked with local business owners, a few reporters, even posed for photos at the press wall. Every interaction was genuine. We weren't performing for her benefit, but the effect was the same. Halfway through the evening, a moment fell into my lap. One of the event photographers approached, asking if we'd pose for a shot for the society page. We agreed, and before the shutter clicked, Claire leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. Not staged, not forced, just us. The camera flash caught it perfectly. I didn't have to look to know my ex had seen it. The stillness in the air told me. An hour later, As we stepped out into the cool night air, she was there on the sidewalk, waiting. "Enjoying the show?" she asked, her voice sharp enough to cut. I met her eyes calm. "No show. Just living my life. You should try it." For a moment, I thought she'd fire back. But instead, she just stood there, the noise of the city rushing around us. And for the first time since this started, she didn't have a script ready. The next morning, the photo from the gala was everywhere. Tagged, shared, reposted. And the narrative she'd been weaving for months started to unravel. Because no one saw a boring, desperate ex in that picture. They saw exactly what she never wanted them to. Me, happy, confident, untouchable. Finally, it wasn't her voice people believed anymore. It was what they saw with their own eyes. In the weeks after the gala, the tone of everything shifted. People who had kept their distance started showing up in my messages again, not with pity, but with curiosity. The same ones who'd once asked, "Are you okay?" were now saying, "You look like you're doing great." The irony was, I hadn't done anything performative that night. Claire and I had just been ourselves, talking, laughing, enjoying the evening. But in a world where people believe what they see, that image was louder than any story my ex could tell. Her online activity tapered off. Not all at once. There were still the occasional vague posts, but the frequency dropped and the edge in her tone dulled. She'd lost her audience. They weren't reacting the way she wanted anymore. One mutual friend, who'd been firmly in her camp during the whole ordeal, sent me a short message out of nowhere. "Guess you weren't the boring one after all." I didn't reply. Some things don't need answers. For Claire, the gala had been the line in the sand. She told me later that she'd seen the relief on my face as we left that night, like I'd finally stopped carrying the weight of someone else's opinion. She wasn't wrong. I'd spent months letting my ex define me, even when I thought I was ignoring her. But walking out of that event, I realized something. I didn't need to win against her. I just needed to live in a way where her version of me couldn't survive. My work relationships bounced back too. The client who'd called with concerns ended up hiring me for another project after seeing the press coverage from the gala. Apparently, boring doesn't photograph well in a tailored suit next to a woman who looks like she could headline a movie premiere. One evening, Claire and I were on her balcony, watching the city lights blink on. She asked if I'd do anything differently if I could start over. I thought about it for a while before answering. "I wouldn't try so hard to convince people," I said. "The truth doesn't need convincing. It just needs time." That's the thing my ex never understood. Reputations built on lies are fragile. They only hold as long as people don't see the reality for themselves. And once they do, the story collapses under its own weight. I don't think about her much anymore. Not out of bitterness, just because she's not relevant to my life now. Her chapter is closed. As for Claire and me, we're still saying yes to new things. Not to prove a point, just because life's too short to sit out the good parts. And if somewhere out there my ex happens to see it, well, she's welcome to watch. You know, looking back, I think the biggest trap I fell into was believing I had to defend myself. Like if I didn't push back against every rumor, people would just assume it was true. But here's the thing. If someone's determined to believe the worst about you, nothing you say will change their mind. What will change it is living in a way they can't twist. If you're in a situation like mine, whether it's an ex, a coworker, or even a family member, remember this. The loudest voice in the room isn't always the one telling the truth. And the best revenge, if you can call it that, isn't about humiliating them. It's about building a life so solid, so unshakable, that their words just bounce off. If you've ever had someone try to rewrite your story, you're not alone. Drop your experience in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more real stories like this, subscribe and stick around. You never know whose truth is coming next.